Without further ado, I'd like to pass you on to Patrick Earle, Executive Director of the Diplomacy Training Programme. Patrick, you have the floor.
Right. Thank you very much, Robert and Bulavanaka, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session on business and human rights defenders, the role of human rights defenders. In particular, this session wants to look at the issues around the challenges to human rights defenders, issues around access to remedy, and the role of solidarity, both within countries and internationally. So I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land I'm joining you from in Sydney, Australia, the lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and in doing so, recognise their struggle for recognition of their rights, and that recognising that they've never ceded sovereignty of their land here, and that their struggles for recognition of their rights connects with the struggles of Indigenous peoples everywhere and the human rights struggles of others. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for organising this forum and for partnering with the Diplomacy Training Programme over the last 3 or 4 years, in focusing on the role of human rights defenders, the role of civil society in promoting the business and human rights agenda, looking at the responsibilities of business to human rights, the role of governments in this very difficult environment for many Pacific Island countries, of holding companies to account for the harms that they sometimes do. And in doing so, I'd also like to acknowledge the partnership that we have with the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, and as leaders of civil society in the Pacific, and with our partner in Fiji, the Citizens Constitutional Forum. That the partnerships are all incredibly important to the work that we do, and the work that we do is very much based on recognising the critical role that civil society plays as a driver of political will to implement human rights, of highlighting human rights issues and concerns, and the vital importance of human rights defenders in the realisation of human rights. So it's really an honour for us to be involved in this session. We've set out some objectives for this session, for the discussion together, and that's really the hope that we have, that we will have time through our speakers and through your participation as participants in this session to bring out some of the challenges that human rights defenders face in the Pacific, which are perhaps different from challenges in other parts of the world, but in some ways they may also be similar. In doing this, we want to try and bring out some experiences of how the courts are responding to business and human rights cases, if they are, in different countries, and how they're doing that, both in relation to the impacts of corporations, but also in relation to how they're dealing with the communities who are raising concerns about negative impacts. We want to look at the international frameworks and laws that look at the responsibilities of business to respect to human rights and provide access to remedy, and what the role of businesses are in relation to human rights defenders. As part of this, we want to look at the role that human rights mechanisms can play, that is the UN special procedures, the human rights treaty bodies, universal periodic review, I guess underpinning all of that is the need to build solidarity both at the national level, across the Pacific, and internationally on these issues. We're hoping that we will be able to focus in particular through 2 of our speakers, focus on the country situations in Papua New Guinea and in Fiji. we then hope to draw those examples out and have a response from a bit more of an international perspective through our very distinguished guest, Anita Ramasastry, who is joining us from all the way from Seattle today. So we're very honored. So just to share a little bit about the speakers, our first speaker today will be Louchrisha Hussai, who we're very delighted will join us from Fiji in the Citizens Constitutional Forum. We're very honored that you're joining us. Louchrisha, you've also been organizing the hub there in Fiji and the discussions. Citizens Constitutional Forum has been very involved with us. In fact, they are the initiator of the diplomacy training program's work in the Pacific in some ways, because it was one of their participants on one of our courses who said this issue is really not understood in the Pacific. We are facing increasingly the impacts of mining companies, extractive industries, logging, but also other areas. And so can we begin some capacity building work on this agenda? And that was around 5 years ago now. So we're delighted that Louchrisha can come and share with us. CCF does a lot of work on the ground with communities, informing them about their rights, building human rights awareness. And in the process, increasingly they're looking at these issues of how companies are impacting. And in a situation where human rights defenders are under wider restrictions as well and face wider threats. We hope also to be joined by Emmanuel Penny, who's from the Save the Sepik campaign, which is an extraordinarily important campaign with significance not just in Papua New Guinea, but also internationally, as they seek to save the very unique place of the Sepik River, which is under threat from a very big gold and copper mine. And then we will ask Anita to share some responses to those presentations and invite responses from the floor. Anita has also shared, I think, already on the chat links, the guidance that the UN Working Group, of which she is vice chair, some guidance in relation to human rights defenders, business and human rights, which is very useful. So thank you for doing that. So without further ado, maybe I'll pass to you, Louchrisha, and just to re-emphasize, as Robert has said, that we would like you very much to share comments and contributions from the chat. I'm hoping that we can cross to the hubs in PNG and Vanuatu as well in the process. What happens in this session is very much down to you, I think, and let's have a rich discussion. And it's a really valuable opportunity to take the discussion forward. So, Louchrisha?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thanks, Patrick. So briefly, I'm Louchrisha, and I work with the Citizens Constitutional Forum. We are a nonprofit organization based out of Fiji, and we work all around the country. Our organization has been around for over 20 years, and our core work involves education and advocacy on human rights, good governance, and multiculturalism. Our exposure and I guess knowledge on the business and human rights agenda really stems and has developed from our long-standing years of partnership opportunities with the diplomacy training program. So it has developed into a more collaborative relationship. So I wish to thank Patrick and DTP for working so hard to ensure that our Pacific voices are included in platforms like this and many others. So thank you. We have worked all around Fiji and also in Namosi and Bua, which are two of the very few local communities that have been impacted by human rights violations caused by business and company activity. In our work of advocacy, however, we emphasize quite strongly on processes. So we scrutinize a lot of processes that happen in communities, as well as encourage an active, informed citizen engagement in these processes. So whether these processes are, the national budget process or making submissions, responding to a call for submissions put out by parliamentary standing committees, we work to ensure that, our target audience is aware of their rights. And we also work to encourage them to, get involved in inclusive consultations within their communities and with the state whenever the opportunity arises. We support them to make demands such as, calling for proposed bills to be simplified, translated, or presented in formats that they can easily understand and be informed in order to effectively engage and contribute during consultations. Generally, the concept of human rights in Fiji is, I wouldn't say new because it's been around for a while, but it seems to continuously be a foreign concept. And because of our society, we're very traditional, we're patriarchal, and we're very cultural. So the concept of human rights is sometimes misunderstood, and it causes conflict with, principles and values that many Fijians are raised in. For example, not questioning your elders, as this might be deemed as disrespectful. So you simply obey versus, the right of freedom of expression and opinion. So as advocates, we have to also be very careful of how we convey this message to our audience and our local communities. So with the advocacy and education, we try our best to ensure that, local communities understand that, the concept of human rights, but also realizing their rights and that the realization comes with a lot of responsibilities. So just a few, challenges human rights organizations and human rights defenders in Fiji face, specific to, I guess, the mandate of business and human rights. The first one is, the monitoring aspect. CCF, we try our best to monitor human rights violations around the country. There's a capacity and resource issue, meaning we are only a team of 11 with an office based out of Suva. So our capacity to monitor is very slim, and our resourcing issue, I'm sure that, a lot of local NGOs that do monitoring or would like to monitor business and human rights don't have massive budgets to allow us to, physically be present to monitor when human rights violations occur and they're brought about by businesses. So for us, we work with communities so that they are aware of concepts such as, free prior informed consent, or FPIC, and, the importance of inclusive consultations in communities, especially when businesses are involved in providing services or development in their communities. There's also the issue of limitation. I've said that we can't physically be there, so we rely heavily on media reports or whatever is captured by the media. So, for example, in the case of Malolo, I believe a lot of you might have seen, we're a real estate development company by the name of Free Soul. They caused extensive environmental damages by dumping waste and ripping out part of the reef without legal approvals to do so. And this happened back in 2017. So the issues with this specific case included, the company began development without having environmental impact assessment approval. And even after it started work, Free Soul was then served with 2 injunction orders. And despite receiving the injunction orders, they continued to do their work. And then finally, the Ministry of Environment conducted an environmental impact assessment in December of 2018. And then a month later, Free Soul was found to have reached nearly half of the EIA's conditions. And by this time, you can imagine that the community nearby had already started experiencing the effects of, the environmental damage brought about by this business activity. So in, in April of 2019, international media covered this story. And following that coverage, the Director of Environment revoked the company's EIA approval. And media attention created, awareness on this specific case. It spotlighted a lot of human rights violation caused by the company. And today it continues to affect the livelihoods of the communities that depended on, their livelihoods around the coastal area there. So we're left to wonder, what if it did not get this coverage, this international media coverage? What would have happened in this instance? So, a couple years down the line, that happened in 2017. Earlier this year, Freesol was found guilty and convicted of, 2 counts of undertaking unauthorized development and for destroying extensive parts of the reef and for violating the terms of development for its project. So further sentencing was supposed to occur in May this year. And last we've heard on the case is in October this year, the sentencing was moved to High Court as the nature of the case required a higher penalty. So although, they're finally getting some sort of redress, it happened back in 2017. So a couple of years later, we're finally getting, and you still hear today that, the communities are still affected, their livelihoods are affected because of the damage it's done or it's caused. The second is awareness of business and human rights, let alone human rights. So if people are not aware of human rights or business and human rights, then there'll simply be no demand for the respect and the protection of these rights. So if businesses are violating human rights, people are not aware that they could hold these big businesses and companies accountable. The third is access to remedies when businesses violate human rights. Because the concept is relatively new and it's growing, the interest is growing in the area, there's almost little to no knowledge on where individuals could go to seek remedy, justice, or redress when rights are violated during business activity. There's also the issue I heard in the earlier panel, that the issue of unions, where here in Fiji, collective efforts are not encouraged, they're not supported, or they're slammed by the administration. So people feel helpless and simply move on without reporting human rights violations. There's also a sense of, mistrust or lack of confidence or faith in institutions and the processes involved. So most times human rights defenders, individuals and communities just simply move on without reporting human rights violations. The final point I wanted to, challenge I wanted to touch on was the issue of transparency. Because our monitoring is so limited, we rely on media, but we also rely on government to act in good faith when issuing contracts or licenses to businesses and companies especially for development. And then especially in areas where, local communities' livelihoods may be affected or may be at stake in the long run. Environmental impact assessment reports need to be made public, as these are crucial to inform development work and decisions of policymakers and communities involved. Having these documents made public is an opportunity for people to hold or monitor companies so that they're accountable and just monitor their willingness to honor their contracts, their side of the contracts. In most cases here in Fiji, that have been reported, many contractors have gone beyond their contracts, whether it's by space or, building extra, so that's been an issue. So if these documents are made public, it'll be easy for people to monitor. What we've also found in local communities is that, information that is made available in communities are presented in English, and our communities are fluent in the vernacular. So although the information might be there, it might not be easily understood or presented in formats that can be easily understood by communities. As an organization, we're hoping that advocacy and education on business and human rights, as well as the guiding principles, continues to grow here in Fiji. There's an increasingly growing need to have this knowledge for local communities and citizens so that they can demand, that services and development project providers brought into their communities are respecting and promoting their human rights. local communities need to be made aware that there are remedies and institutions that they can seek or reach out to locally and internationally for redress when they feel that their rights are being violated by business activity. Currently, CCF holds the secretariat role for the Universal Periodic Review. We think that this is a good platform because it involves the review of human rights records and the human rights status of a particular country by UN member states. So what this secretariat role involves is collating and collecting information from local nonprofit organizations that allow us to furnish the stakeholder or the shadow report that's presented at a state review. So this is an avenue that perhaps local communities can work with and through to have their voices included in the reports of such magnitude. So this is an opportunity for them to highlight mass human rights violations they're experiencing, and all of this is done in the hopes to improve the human rights status on the ground here in Fiji. I think I will end there to allow Emmanuel to share, or Anita. But yeah, thank you again, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Louchrisha. It's really great to hear about the work that you're doing, and including the challenges of that work, and in the specific context of Fiji. I think it's been really interesting in this forum also to hear in other sessions from examples, say from Tavita in relation to the work they've been doing around black sand mining, some of the other issues that have come up. Also, I think the extent to which migrant workers, the treatment of seasonal workers has also been a really strong theme of this forum, perhaps more than the previous forums, and the labour rights issues, Fiji having one of the biggest economies, there are such a range of issues. So it's just really good to hear about your work there and the way it's been developing and some of the challenges. And I'd like to highlight here also that there was a recent report by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights with the support of the Swiss government on women human rights defenders. And that also came up, I think, with that sense of that terminology around human rights and human rights defenders is perhaps a more recent one in the Pacific. It's got a power, but it's more recent and requires socialization and engagement. I think that's a good moment, in a way, if I can ask then to come to Professor Anita Ramasastry from the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, who's been so busy and engaged in driving this agenda forward. And I should acknowledge the UN Working Group, our collaboration with Surya Deva in particular, in this work in the Pacific over the last number of years, which has been so significant in making the UN special procedures accessible to more and more people, I think, and promoting knowledge and understanding of the guidelines. Anita, we're really honoured that you can join us. It's terrific because you bring a global perspective to this work, a great depth of knowledge and experience as an activist academic and somebody who's really led globally in this area. So it'd be really nice if I could ask you to both respond to what you've heard a little bit, to put questions out also to the floor, I think, because we have a number of human rights defenders. I see the comment from Jerry there as well in PNG. But to share a bit also that global experience of how this work has developed and what you see as some of the key challenges and opportunities in this work and in relation to the role of human rights defenders. So thanks, Anita.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. And again, just thank you for the opportunity. I feel very honored to be here and listen to this conversation. Louchrisha, your presentation was really excellent and full of so much information. I'll begin with some observations, pose some questions, and then maybe just for a couple of minutes talk about the guidance that the working group has just issued, which you can find a link in the chat. I think, Louchrisha, your presentation illustrates, I think, the larger challenge in the area of business and human rights for human rights defenders and environmental defenders, land right defenders, women's rights, any defender, is that it's a job that requires many different hats and skills that I think, and I think the global community may not understand that in terms of both the resources that should be provided to defenders, as well as the different roles they play. I think when you ask a company in particular, who is a human rights defender, what do they do? Their sole image is of someone who might be representing a community making trouble, right? I mean, in terms of objecting to a project or a particular business activity. But as Louchrisha has explained in her role is as someone who empowers others, who brings out and gives transparency to human rights abuses, who trains people, who engages in litigation, who works with communities. She mentions, of course, the Universal Periodic Review to bring things to the corridors of power. So I would just say a starting point is for us to acknowledge and recognize that being a defender requires many different skills. And then we add on top of that, understanding the guiding principles, which is not easy for anyone in terms of it's a complex document with some basic principles, but adding in the business and human rights layer. So Louchrisha, I just think your presentation was really an excellent roadmap on what is the role of a defender. My question for everyone here is really one of the things that is a big challenge, I think, for all of us is how businesses engage with defenders and with the people they represent at the beginning. How can we change that so that business consults with defenders and understand that defenders are actually and should be their allies and their partners, that especially in difficult and in challenging environments, who knows better what the problems are than the defenders? So I would say that the working group in its work all over the globe, and we travel on country visits, we see the same challenges for defenders everywhere we go. It's universal, and this is a problem. So your advice on what will change the way in which businesses engage with defenders. We are trying to help change that, but your perspective. That's at the beginning. I see in the chat something that was part of the discussion yesterday too, which is the issue of remedy. Defenders, and again, communities, there's a perception that asking for remedy is somehow asking for something special and something that a rights holder isn't entitled to. And the road to a remedy is never easy, is never clear, and is one full of obstacles. So the question is, from the defender perspective, how can we move companies to address remedy at the company level, and to do so in a way that is quick, and respectful, and not relying on years of delay? I don't have an answer, but the third question I have, or again for experiences, is the other problem we see is how companies or governments can sometimes abuse the legal process. So in many countries we see now, and I hope for the Pacific this does not happen as much, that companies and governments will use civil lawsuits against defenders for criticism, so defamation lawsuits. We call these strategic lawsuits against public participation, but this is a growing and rising problem. Silencing defenders, so companies using the legal system as a technique, or using criminal penalties, so trying to use criminal law to intimidate defenders. We have tried to work with companies to say, maybe you are not the one using the legal system, maybe it's the government, maybe it's a business partner, maybe, but you have a responsibility to step up and to stop this. And so it's just a challenge. So those are my questions for you. How do we change how companies engage with defenders at the beginning? How do we deal with the barriers to remedy at the company level? And again, how do we prevent governments and businesses from abusing the legal system to silence defenders? These are the three challenges. I'll just conclude by saying what we have provided a link to is we have taken the guiding principles and we have provided guidance to states and to companies about how to ensure respect for human rights defenders. So not just respect in general, but what we are asking of companies and governments is that when they think of human rights due diligence, when they think of remedy, they actually think about the potential risks and harms to the defender community. And they take steps to address that, because there are many risks for defenders. They also come up with plans to properly consult and engage with defenders. And they also think about how remedy, if a defender is at risk, is very different, because there are issues of life and of security, many challenges. So remedy procedures need to be specially tailored to address concerns to defenders. So the guidance is a tool. I will welcome the chance for your feedback when you have a chance to look at the guidance. We hope to translate it. We hope to use it as a tool to work with governments and with companies in the Pacific and really in all parts of the globe. So again, thank you, and I look forward to hearing your observations.
Thank you very much, Anita. That's really helpful and a great sharing. Thanks for putting those challenges out there. I know that I think we'd be very interested perhaps in doing a special session on the guidance to have a dialogue in the Pacific as part of that familiarization and looking at the issues around human rights defenders and access to remedy. As part of the sort of the conversation here, I was hoping we could go to you, Andrina, in the Vanuatu hub to hear from the experience in Vanuatu. Andrina, can you hear us? And in particular, if you want to pick up those challenges that Anita put to us around ways in which to engage companies. Have you had experience from trying to engage companies in relation to their harms? What are the barriers to remedy? And how do we prevent companies from abusing the system? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We're still having audio problems in Vanuatu, so there might be a little bit of echo in the background. Most businesses don't do in Vanuatu, including the Vanuatu government. And when we talk about the work of human rights defenders, human rights defenders are discriminated. Human rights defenders are discriminated when they do work, and the work of human rights defenders in Vanuatu is voluntary, so there's no funding at all for CSOs to be doing or raising issues on human rights. If there's no compliance to do human rights due diligence, which is elusive in Vanuatu, how can the Human Rights Commission, the Office of the Human Rights Commission assist in ensuring that Vanuatu is made aware that due diligence is necessary? One of the questions we also have is, would the Commissioner of the Office of the Commission of Human Rights be interested in the underlying principles and practices of traditional cultural businesses? In a lot of instances, we talk about concepts like gender equality, which are foreign to Vanuatu. But already we have our own traditional practices, our own traditional customs that value women, and gender equality in the matrilineal lineage is already emphasized. So how do we actually bring the underlying principles and practices of traditional cultural business or traditional knowledge together so that Vanuatu doesn't see it as a foreign concept, but a concept that they can actually relate to and ensure that, you know, gender equality is practiced. For the last 9 years, there has been no woman in Vanuatu Parliament. So there's no voice and space for women to talk about issues that concern them. I have a participant that is interested to actually raise an issue on cultural business. She teaches at the USP here, and she has knowledge on traditional cultural business. So I'm just asking her to maybe elaborate further on this question.
Say what means introduce.
So Marilyn Temacon,
Let's run the USP. Good morning to everyone. We're having technical problems in Vanuatu, etc. But we are thankful. We're so thankful that we can join everybody else, and we listen to all of you since Monday up to now. And we're so interested in every single presentation and the discussions. My name is Marilyn Temacon, and I teach intellectual property law and legislation at the USP Imalus campus in Port Vila. Just an interest that indigenous people in Vanuatu and also in the Pacific Island countries, we have indigenous people who sort of do not know a lot about what's happening internationally. And they continue in their daily lives, practicing what they've been doing for since time immemorial. And I'm so interested in finding how can some of the reasons for their trading and their businesses, they're so different from the norm. They're more centered around the individual, not centered around profit and gain. And it's like, it's a practicing thing, it's a living practice. And we don't have a voice internationally, for example. But I was just suggesting to my friend here, Andrina, how is it possible to maybe make some studies on it and see how we can include some of the principles, because the practices that we have, traditional trading practices, they have what they're based on a different type of principle on the human person, and also they are more they are climate friendly. What do you call it? Climate friendly, and so with this current situation of climate change and the danger that the whole world is facing, I've been thinking seriously that maybe it is time that we look at the options that we have that's available to us now. If internationally, if we can sort of allow ourselves to dare to look at ancient or maybe practices that were there all these years, and we have not sort of paid attention why indigenous people do things in a particular way. And that's maybe I'm speaking too low. So this is the reason why it is. I was thinking that maybe it's important in relation to human rights around the world, not necessarily, just in the Pacific. We have a lot. Indigenous people, I think, have a lot to contribute. I'm an indigenous person myself in Vanuatu, and as an academic, I've been thinking a bit about this, and I think it is important that the Human Rights Commission, Secretariat, and I think everybody's aware of it already. I'm just repeating maybe something that's already been done, except I haven't heard since Monday. I listened to every speakers, and I'm just thinking that maybe it is time we also look at traditional trading and business practices. Maybe they have something in there that maybe we can include in some legislation or maybe some agreements. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really terrific. It's very, I think there's a sense in which this agenda around business and human rights is also emerging and evolving, and the voices from the Pacific are incredibly important to that evolution. There's a very strong sense, not least from COP26 in Glasgow, and all of the scientific reports, that the current model around the way that business is done globally is destroying our planet. And I think that there is a new receptivity, we hope, to Indigenous people's voices and perspectives, and their knowledge and the way of doing things in the world that will enable our planet to survive. So I think please continue to be involved in these discussions as we go forward. It's really important that you've raised those points. Can I now go to Papua New Guinea? We have a very experienced human rights defender there, Cressida Kuala. Now the connection, I think, has been bad in the past, but I was hoping that we could ask Cressida to join to share her experience of seeking access to remedy, both through approaches to a company, but also then her experience of the government's responsibility. Cressida, are you there? Can you hear? And can you share something of your experience, lessons learned? And that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. And Cressida joins us particularly from the Porgera area of Papua New Guinea. Thanks, Cressida.
For me to speak?
Yes, please. Yeah, please, Cressida. Hi, we can see you, but the connection's not great.
You can see all the women and children. We are here together, sharing this moment together. It is very important to everyone in the Pacific and throughout the world. I'm Cressida Kuala from Porgera. I'm an indigenous female human rights advocate, business and human rights advocate, and a woman rep here in Porgera. I'm very happy to be part of the team for the second human rights I have been an advocate for 10 years now. I started working as a translator in 2012, but actually I started as a mine employee. I started advocating. I was mistreated by the company in the so I left job without resignation. That women were found national organization as International, and they started interviewing women. In realization to Barrick and PJV, they started to create establish a reconciliation plan here in Porgera at the Porgera station. It was established out of the company premises. We didn't realize that we complied with business and human rights, kind of a new knowledge horizon for people here in Porgera. Nobody knows what has been happening here in 2012 and 11. We only realized when our international partners came to Pogera, the university students and lecturers from Harvard University, New York University, and Columbia University came to do investigation on the killings here at the Pogera mine. When Jimmy Wangia from APA raised voice of killing, his brother died at the mine dump site. So these issues have been dealt by our international partners at the international frontier, but advocates started to arise after translating to people within the Pogera vicinity, and we realized that our work as an advocate became a tool where we can voice our people's issue at the global frontier. We didn't even approach our government, the PNG national government. Our government didn't know the idea and the right. Maybe we are partners to that, but then we went ahead to go to the international global fund to voice issues. We even went to face the transnational corporate executive in Toronto. Canadian Barrick and PJV is a Canadian mining company, and we went to Toronto to voice issues that had affected our life, livelihood, and the environment. And we got the company's attention. I'm in place already, and there were 130 women who shared their experience, and they were interviewed by the company through a commission.
Cressida, I'm really sorry. I think
limited. They were lawyer minister
Cressida,
can you hear me?
I think the line is very difficult, and it's very hard to hear for us, but we really appreciate you taking the time to share. I think the line and the difficulty of accessing the internet is an example of some of the challenges in the Pacific in getting stories out, in getting access to remedy. But we acknowledge the extraordinary efforts that you and others have made in Porgera over a very long time in very, very difficult circumstances, and your extraordinary efforts at gaining international solidarity, bringing this attention to bringing the world's attention to this issue. And we wish you well as you go forward too in this. We know your struggle is not over, and I thank you for joining us here today. Can we also go to perhaps others in PNG? I think Jerry wanted to share as well about a particular issue. And I'm conscious that I think we only have 10 minutes left. So Jerry, can you be quite brief? Because I'd love to come back to Anita also, if we can, before the end, and also to Louchrisha. Thank you. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Pat, and everyone who are watching me out there. Yesterday, I know I have presented on business on human rights, and now I want to a little bit talk about Asia Pacific environment, human rights defenders. I just want to highlight two main points here. Sorry, first of all, before I start kick off, I am calling from Papua New Guinea, here in the Pacific Island. My two main points here is I just want to talk about first one is about building safe space for dialogue and support amongst environmental human rights defenders. And number two is mining pollutions. So on these two notes, I want to just highlight and elaborate a little bit on this issues here. The big mining companies in the process of operating the mine have been neglecting the environmental issues surrounding the operations. These companies have no regards for the environment in which they operate. The mine tailings are dumped or deposited into the river systems and the surrounding environment, thus killing all the marine animals, live and destroying the environment and its evidence, where the surrounding areas depends on their survivals on a daily basis. These giant mines also produce huge quantities of harmful and also poisonous gas into the air and pollute the gas, pollute the fresh air that we breathe. This very gas affect the ozone layers, thus causing greenhouse emissions all in the ozone layer, which leads to the ice caps in the polar regions to melt, causing the sea level to rise, putting small island states like Papua New Guinea and other countries to the risk of sinking. Therefore, I also like to seek the remedy here in Papua New Guinea. Also, on the big logging companies operating in Papua New Guinea have no regards for the environmental and the landowners in which they harvest the logs. Their main motive is to harvesting logs, giving little or no lifetime benefits for the people or the environment. They use big machines to clear the forest by then destroying the entire environment. When one big tree is fall it also destroys the other small trees and the other plants. The river systems is also polluted, killing the marine species. The forest is cleared, causing landslide and mudslide, killing and destroying the animal kingdoms, where the people get their food sources from. These companies don't have any regards for the future of this forest sustainability. They only come to destroy the environment and leave it bare when they finish operations. We suffer as a result of their greedy, selfish behavior. Therefore, we recommend that these points be considered, and it's very important so to safeguard and protect our environment from being exploded and destroyed. My two recommendations are last recommendation for this two main points here is one, I want the government must enact a very strong laws to protect our environment from being destroyed at all costs. These laws governing the environment should ensure these companies, whether it be a mining, logging factory, to conform to these environment laws and safeguard our environment in Papua New Guinea. The government should have qualified environmental scientists testing and checking the surrounding environment on daily routine. If these companies found guilty of polluting the environment, they must pay if the fines not exceeding 100 million kina.
Thank you, Jerry. Jerry, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm very conscious also that we have other participants we need to go to in other places. So if you can share those recommendations in the chat, that would be really helpful. And then what we might do is I think we need to go to the Fiji hub, but we also had other friends, I think, who wanted to share with us, and we need to come back to Anita and Louchrisha. So I think from Karath, you wanted to join, and Jimmy from Porgera, just to add something else on the Porgera situation. But if I can ask you, please, to keep it very brief. And then we'd like to go to the Fiji hub. They've raised some significant questions for us to address. Thank you. Okay, Karath, are you ready to share? Okay. I think maybe we have a connection problem there as well. So maybe we can go to the Fiji hub. Is that possible?
Yes, I'm on.
Oh, Karath, okay.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the privilege to speak in addition to what Cressida said. We apologize for the internet connection progress always quick. I'm currently in the national capital city of Port Moresby. I will elaborate a little bit on the pressing issues that are affecting us at program. Plus, like as Cressida has said, the mine has created so much human rights abuse issues. We have been seeking remedy from the perpetrator. The company is known as the perpetrator, as well as the government is known as the perpetrator. We classify both of them as perpetrator, but they haven't taken the accountability. Responsibility, transparency is not found in both of them according to basic human rights and guiding principles and the OECD guidelines. They have failed miserably. We are seeking remedy in the last 17 years. Since 2004, we have been fighting for remedy for the victims who are being abused by the program mine. We are looking for means and ways to get support from any entities who could help us seek redress for those who have been victimized by the mining operation. We are now currently offering the government and the company to include us into the mining agreement that we can seek redress for those victims who are being abused. The company and the government of Papua New Guinea has already gone to two separate agreements. One is called the binding, one is called the framework agreement. The other is called the commencement agreement, in which we have seen that both of them as nothing that could remedy those who are being abused by the mining operation. Now we are trying to push the government or the company to include us into one of those pending agreements to include us, or otherwise review or revisit those two agreements that they have already proceeded. And we need support from you to help us to give more pressure to the company and the government of Papua New Guinea to look into those mining victims. In the last 3 years,
sorry, Karath, I might cut you off just there. I feel terrible for doing so, but we hear your struggle, and we note that you have raised this also in the Universal Periodic Review, and the issues can be addressed perhaps by our continuing work together to try and find access to remedy, and that the lessons from your experience can prevent future problems in places like the Freda River gold and copper mine. It's a really terrible experience, and I'm sorry to cut you short, but I think now, can we go to the Fiji hub to hear from them? And they had some particular questions. And I think we also have a request to go to the Solomon Islands as well. So I'm sorry, time is short. Fiji?
Thank you so much, Patrick. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. That's great. Thanks.
Yes, okay. Yes. So Louchrisha mentioned the lack of resources in terms of carrying out monitoring work on business and human rights. How can OHCHR, DTP, and relevant stakeholders assist local NGOs in their monitoring work? That is our question.
Okay, thank you. So Anita, maybe you can take note of that, and we go to the Solomon Islands, and let's come back to saying at the end, what can we do to take this forward? So Solomons, are you ready for us to cross to you? Hello, Solomon. You're on mute at the moment.
Good morning from the Solomon Islands. The one contribution I would like to make, so I'm an officer from the Law Reform Commission, and from all the discussions that we've had, Solomon Islands currently has laws in place to protect human rights, especially in the business sector, but we do have poor enforcement and poor monetary systems. But the positive thing to look forward to is that these laws will be coming under review. So we have opportunities to create stronger systems in the future. And I really like what one of the previous presenters has mentioned was that people need to be aware of that there are laws, there are policies in place to protect the human rights, especially in the workplace. So I think that will be one of the main work for the government and as well as the other stakeholders here in the Solomon Islands is to increase the awareness amongst our people. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard that very strongly from quite a number of the contributions, is the need to generate awareness of rights so that people then can think about how to claim their rights and looking at those avenues which they can use. Anita, can I come back to you to share reflections on what you've heard from here? I think there's a sense in which there is a great frustration at the lack of access to remedy, partly. But how do you hear things as different or similar in the Pacific, and any advice on the way forward based on that international experience you bring?
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences, and I share your frustration. I should say, as a younger lawyer, spent many years with a law firm in Seattle litigating a case involving Rio Tinto and Papua New Guinea that was eventually unsuccessful in the US court. So from that time on, I think have been aware of the challenges from the region, but they are shared everywhere. So I think a few things that I heard. One was, I think, the interesting comments about business and traditional practices and cultural practices and how they provide a different model. I made a comment in the chat to say the first step in highlighting these is to make them visible so that people understand that there are these alternatives, and then thinking about how, if we talk about mandatory human rights due diligence and other things, that these kinds of practices can become required of the way businesses operate. That's a large challenge, but it's one I think that, again, because remedy has been so difficult, we often have to think of prevention and changing the way we do business. So that's one reflection for me I took note of and think it's very important. I think a second one, the question from the Fiji hub, with the new laws in the EU we heard about yesterday and other places, I think one of the questions will be, will there be resources provided for community-based monitoring and due diligence? So I think this is an opportunity on a regional basis for the defenders and the people here to start to, maybe as part of a campaign, to ask for this, to seek funding. A third piece is that when you are campaigning at home for changes to the law, is to really say that in agreements with companies, part of due diligence should be support for the work of communities and monitoring. So again, you need the resources, you have the ability and the knowledge, but you need the resources. So I think all of these things. On remedy, I do not have an answer today. I share your frustration and I honor your work, but I would say it's very important for all of us as we speak to Geneva and the UN, as we speak to the EU, that access to remedy must be part of any regulation that is being developed. Without it, the mandatory human rights due diligence will not have any meaning for us. So access to remedy must be key to that. So that is my only reflection, and I wish I had more.
Thank you very much, Anita. That's very helpful. And the access to remedy is very much a work in progress, isn't it? Both globally and in local and national contexts. And part of the value of these exchanges and is looking at different approaches, I think, as well, and good practice. I think it's a very nice and practical suggestion to look at what we heard from this forum and the presentation around the new European Union regulation on deforestation, which very valuably, I think, links up some of the work around the environment and human rights and environmental human rights defenders and human rights defenders, and the agendas around the sustainable development goals that we can use. Now the agenda coming out of COP26 in Glasgow and the commitments there, that sense of the critical role that you as human rights defenders play on the ground, defending your environment, your communities, is valued by the world. It needs to be invested in, and the capacities need to be built. Louchrisha, can I ask you to share some reflections from what you've heard from everybody today, and also if you have other things from the Fiji Hub to share? I see there's a question about how do we sustain ourselves as human rights defenders in this difficult work.
I guess my final, conclusion, really just listening to human rights defenders from around the region is really on two things, self-care and solidarity, the importance of it in this work. The fight is far from long being over. And, like Anita said, remedies are not gonna, just come overnight, or it's gonna be a long struggle, but, the importance of self-care, all of us being able to take care of ourselves in doing this work, and the importance of solidarity, especially here in Fiji, where, and I'm sure other countries around the region too, your framework or your environment, your legal framework or the environment doesn't allow you or doesn't support the kind of work or encourage you to be good troublemakers, So take care of yourself and, reach out to the different networks you have. The Fiji Hub has been talking a lot about solidarity and self-care. We've learned over the last, 6 months, we've been very flexible in trying to do the work we do from our own homes and the challenges that comes with, and all the mental stress that has brought about. So I'm just gonna share on self-care and solidarity and the importance of it in this work. But thank you everybody for sharing.
Thank you very much, Louchrisha. I think the COVID has brought particular challenges, I think, where people feel even more isolated. But I think time and again, we hear in the programs that we run, the value of people coming together and sharing, in that sense that we're not alone. People are not alone in the struggles that they're experiencing. They can feel that way, and they can feel very disempowered when a company comes to their land and they try and engage with that company and get refused. I think the value of hearing of others who've gone through that experience, learning from those, and knowing that there are support networks out there. And it's really lovely to see in the chat the links that are being shared, the offers of help and support, the practical suggestions that are there also. Please have a look at those, take those links down, share them. Have a sense that there is a growing movement for human rights in the Pacific. There are more organizations working on these issues. There are more organizations there that are dedicated to assisting you in your work. And I should acknowledge that we work in partnership with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, also, which has a Pacific researcher in Amy Sinclair. We'll share her details. But she is very dedicated to amplifying your voices from the ground and to seeking support from you And one of the things we have learned from there is that while companies may feel that they can ignore somebody at the community level, they find it very difficult to ignore an international NGO. They find it very difficult to ignore a communication from the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights and from other UN special procedures. And if their activities begin to get noticed in processes like the Universal Periodic Review or Human Rights Treaty Body reporting, they begin to realize that they have to change. And I think that's also where the guidance, very practical and important guidance from the UN Working Group, becomes significant to all of us in our work. You know, we don't have to each act individually. If we act together and in solidarity, we can help bring remedy about in different ways and help bring accountability about and help to bring about the changes that are demanded by the global frameworks on business and human rights, on the SDGs, on climate change. I feel I've overindulged my role as moderator and chair here as well in talking too much. So can I invite any others who would like to share before we leave? We have the last few minutes. And if I don't see a hand rapidly, I will go back to Anita for some concluding remarks, because I think she will take from this discussion into the global discussions also, and perhaps she can look forward to what happens next after here very valuably.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick. No, I think what I've done is taken note of all of your comments, your challenges, and I think the challenge is for us to help bring voice to what you're doing in places outside of your country, and to be allies in affirming what you are asking for in terms of human rights. So I think that is the larger reason it's so important, and I'm so grateful for these opportunities, and I thank my colleague, Professor Surya Dev, for engaging the working group in this, because we are here really to serve you. I mean, that's our work. And I'm glad, Patrick, you mentioned, of course, the complaints and communications procedure. We can, in partnership with you, bring attentions and concerns to companies, right? That we are one more channel. And so please think of us as one more tool in your toolkit as you think about these issues on a daily basis. So thank you again. And I hope that we have more opportunities to meet, even if virtually.
Thank you very much, Anita. It's been really kind of you to make the time to join us. I see Fiji Hub's got his hand up quickly. So let's go there if we can, if that's possible. And now I'll say a final thank you to Anita and to Louchrisha, and also to absent friends who couldn't join us today. Fiji.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to add before we close, just one of the challenges I have faced as someone working in the kind of environment space and trying to connect green business as a young entrepreneur in the green business space. One of the biggest challenges is just terminology. A lot of times you get kind of labeled as an activist or a greenie, and that immediately shuts doors in terms of trying to further the conversation or try and move the agenda towards something more progressive. And I guess in some ways, one of the recommendations would be for us to collectively think of different words or different ways we can reframe the amazing work that we're doing in upholding ecological justice. So just so that when we enter a different space, we're communicating in a way that is palatable, not saying dumbing down, but just so that it does not immediately put up barriers for our engagement or inhibit our ability to put forward exactly what we need to say. And diplomacy is something that I've learned very quickly recently. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, I think we're just about out of time, but thank you to everybody for their contributions. Apologies to those that didn't get to speak, including Patricia. I'll pass the microphone back to Rob to close now. But thank you, and the conversations and the work continues. We look forward to seeing you and working with you in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks to everybody who's spoken. Patrick, great job on managing the session. I know there's a few changes, but it's great to see that we went to so many places and so many different hubs and countries to cover everybody's points of view. I feel like after this session is a really inspirational session for hearing everybody who really dedicates and puts their life on the line to protect human rights.